Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving straight into a really critical global challenge, the escalating food crisis of 2025.
It's a huge topic.
Absolutely. We've sifted through a lot of essential information, the 2025 Global Report on Food Crises, the latest news, detailed analyses from groups like the FAO, the WFP.
Key sources, definitely.
And our goal in this deep dive is to really get a handle on the gravity of the situation and maybe answer that fundamental question. Is the world genuinely running out of food? Or is it more about access, distribution, the resilience of our systems?
That's a huge question with really far-reaching consequences. And as our sources show, the scale of this emergency, it really can't be overstated.
Right.
Back in 2024, over 295 million people across 53 countries were facing acute hunger. That's crisis levels or worse.
Crisis levels, wow.
And what's really alarming, I think, is that this is the 6th consecutive year we've seen acute hunger rising globally.
6th year, so not just a blip.
No, not a temporary setback. It's a deeply, deeply concerning trend.
Absolutely. And behind those huge numbers, there's just immense human suffering. A record 1.9 million people experienced catastrophic hunger phase 5 in 2024.
More than double the previous year.
Double. We're talking about people facing the absolute extreme, aren't we? Just utter food deprivation.
Exactly. And tragically, we've already seen famine declared in parts of Sudan starting back in July 2024. And projections show other areas could follow.
And Gaza, too.
The Gaza Strip is perilously close. There's a significant risk of famine projected between May and September of this year, 2025.
And those situations, Sudan, Gaza, they really highlight something the report stressed, don't they?
They do. It's a vital point. Famine is rarely just about a lack of food overall.
Right.
It's so often a direct result of conflict, restricted aid access, sometimes even deliberate political actions.
Which raises those critical questions about justice, accountability.
Precisely. The sources really underscore that.
And this isn't just isolated to those specific horrific situations. We're seeing global food prices surge everywhere.
Driven by export bans, as you mentioned, countries trying to lock down their own supplies.
And those high fuel costs, they just inflate everything. Farming inputs, transport.
Everything. And on top of that, extreme weather just keeps hammering crops globally.
I saw the U.S. figure over $20 billion in losses to crops and rangeland in 2024, just from weather disasters.
Huge. And adding another sort of layer to this whole complex picture, the 2025 Global Report on Food Crises, it anticipates a significant drop, potentially up to 45% in humanitarian funding for food sectors.
45%.
This year, yes. So just when the need is greater than ever, the resources to help are actually shrinking. Dramatically.
Okay, so let's really dig into this central question then. Are we truly running out of food? Because all this evidence, the sheer number of hungry people, the famines, the spiking prices, it paints a terrifying picture.
It does. But what's particularly revealing, I think, across all the sources, is this strong consensus. It points towards the second part of your question.
Access and distribution.
Yes. While specific regions definitely face production challenges, climate change, conflict, absolutely the big picture. The global data suggests this crisis is fundamentally about breakdowns. Breakdowns in access, distribution, fairness, equity, and just the overall resilience, the robustness of our food systems.
So the food might exist, globally speaking.
But the system for getting it to those who need it most, that's where we're seeing these critical failures.
Right. Less about an empty global larder, more about how that larder is managed and who gets a share.
Precisely. And the sources, they meticulously detail this perfect storm of interconnected root causes that have led us here.
Okay, let's break those down. Starting with climate change.
The ultimate disruptor, as one report called it.
Yeah.
And we're seeing a clear accelerating trend, more frequent, more intense extreme weather.
Droughts, floods, heat waves.
Unpredictable rainfall. Yeah. Agriculture is just squarely in the path of these changes.
And the economic hit is already massive. That $20.3 billion loss in the U.S. in 2024.
A stark illustration. And remember, the El Nino event, 2023-2024.
Caused huge harvest failures in southern Africa, right? Severe drought.
Exactly. And looking ahead, NASA's projections, they suggest a potential 24% drop in global corn yields by the end of the century, just from rising temperatures.
24%. And it's not just corn, is it?
No. Forecasts suggest climate change could push up prices for corn, soybeans, wheat, maybe 26 to 30% higher by 2050.
So it's this long-term pressure, but it's already feeding into the acute crisis right now.
Absolutely. And it's truly global. We saw that, 37% of Canadian farmland was abnormally dry or in drought just this April.
Yeah.
And 74% of countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, highly vulnerable to extreme weather cutting their agricultural output.
So climate change isn't some distant threat. It's undermining food security right now.
It is a massive factor impacting production.
Okay. What about war and instability? Sadly, we're seeing those devastating effects in so many places.
War and instability. They act as incredibly potent catalysts for food insecurity. They destroy vital infrastructure farms, roads, storage.
Force farmers off their land.
Exactly. Displacement. They disrupt trade routes. And, tragically, we are seeing cases where food and aid are deliberately used as weapons. Denied.
It's horrific. The war in Ukraine is such a stark example. Nearly 5 million hectares of farmland abandoned in 2024. That's huge.
Resulting in an estimated $73 billion in economic losses just for the agricultural sector there.
And even though some exports continue through the Black Sea route, the future feels really uncertain.
It does. And the situation in Gaza, it's just catastrophic. A near total collapse of the food system there. 75% of cropland damaged by late 2024.
And 100% of the population facing acute food shortages.
Yes. And the reports of ongoing aid blockades since March this year, they're deeply troubling. They directly contribute to that looming famine risk.
And then Sudan. Famine declared, as we said, 13 million displaced, nearly 25 million facing acute food insecurity.
A devastating illustration of how conflict translates directly into mass hunger.
And it's not just those headline conflicts, is it?
No, not at all. In Ethiopia, conflict in the Amhara region, combined with that U.S. aid suspension early this year, severe consequences for millions.
Right.
And the Global Report on Food Crises specifically highlighted conflict as the primary driver for 140 million people facing acute food insecurity.
140 million across 20 countries in 2024.
Just from conflict.
So climate change hitting production, conflict disrupting growing and distribution. What about the logistics, the supply chains themselves?
Well, the global food supply chain, it showed some recovery from the worst of the pandemic disruptions, but it's still vulnerable.
Still fragile.
Very. We've got lingering effects, compounded now by new geopolitical tensions, ongoing climate impacts on transport ports, rivers, roads, and just persistent logistical hurdles.
And the cost of these disruptions.
Estimated at a staggering $184 billion annually. From all factors: climate, cyber attacks, geopolitics.
An immense figure. And all that talk about reshoring, bringing production home after COVID, it doesn't seem to have happened on a big enough scale to really cushion these shocks.
Not significantly, no. And we also can't forget the sheer amount of food just lost or wasted within these supply chains.
About 30%, right?
Roughly 30% of all food produced annually. It's huge. Damage to transport in conflict zones, hurricanes hitting ports. These are constant threats to just moving food efficiently.
And layered on top, the broader economic pressures like rising fuel prices making everything more expensive.
Exactly. Fertilizer prices stabilized a bit early this year, but they're still way higher than before 2021.
And likely to get worse for farmers.
Affordability is expected to worsen? Yes. And we're seeing this worrying trend too. The geopoliticization of essential inputs.
Like fertilizer.
Yeah. The Ukraine war hit European energy, which affects fertilizer production.
Yeah.
China restricted fertilizer exports in 2024, further destabilizing things.
And the sources point out, during conflict, seeds and fertilizer just become scarce and prices shoot up.
Which creates a vicious cycle, doesn't it? Makes it even harder for farmers in those areas to recover, to replant.
Exactly. And then there's the issue of governments just banning exports.
This is a really critical factor. When a government restricts food exports to protect its own supply.
Seems logical from their perspective.
Maybe. But it has severe knock-on effects for countries that depend on those imports.
How widespread is this?
As of December 2024, 17 countries had 22 food export bans in place. Another 8 had export limiting measures.
And India's rice ban back in 2023-24 really showed the impact, didn't it?
Absolutely. A major exporter makes a move like that. It's significantly cut global shipments, shifted market share, even though restrictions eased later.
And Russia, being such a huge wheat exporter,
projected 45 million tons for 2025-26. Any disruption there has massive global implications. And indeed, the USDA is projecting lower exports from Russia and Kazakhstan this year.
It highlights what the report called the protectionism paradox.
Yes. National actions for self-preservation actually end up worsening global food security overall.
Like everyone grabbing their own oxygen mask on the plane, but it lowers the cabin pressure for everyone.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
And these causes, they don't operate in isolation, do they?
No, they're all interconnected,
A climate failure triggers an export ban, drives up prices globally.
which hammers poorer nations already dealing with economic shocks or conflict.
It's a complex web, a tangled web of interconnected vulnerabilities.
This paints a really concerning picture of how we got here. So, the global impact. It sounds like some parts of the world are just getting hit much, much harder.
That's absolutely correct. This crisis is carving out a deeply unequal world when it comes to hunger. Africa, the sources consistently show, is bearing the brunt. Highest levels of acute food insecurity, famine risk in several countries.
And heavily reliant on aid, which is now shrinking.
Exactly. The figures are just staggering. Sudan's famine, over 25 million facing acute food insecurity there.
Ethiopia, 22 million food insecure, over a million acutely malnourished children, plus the aid freeze impact.
Nigeria, over 31 million in crisis or worse. The DRC, similar numbers, huge numbers of malnourished
It's
kids.
the Sahel region, too.
Projected over 52 million facing acute hunger this summer, and the WFP warning of devastating funding cuts there.
Southern Africa hit by the El Nino drought.
Widespread harvest failures, the Horn of Africa, especially Somalia, severe insecurity, high child food poverty.
And hanging over all of this, that potential 45% drop in humanitarian funding, a massive threat.
It's almost impossible to truly grasp the scale of suffering behind these numbers.
It really is. What about Asia? We often think of it as a major food producer.
It is, but it faces its own vulnerabilities. High populations putting pressure on resources, heavy reliance on rice.
Which is becoming less secure.
Yes, due to water scarcity, climate impacts.
Hmm.
It's also vulnerable to export bans from big producers like India.
Right.
Climate change is projected to cut rice yields in Southeast Asia. South Asia faces risks from heat waves, glacier melt impacting water.
So even the traditional rice bowl is under pressure.
Significant pressure. Despite efforts like the Asian Development Bank support, several Asian countries, Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Myanmar, Pakistan, Yemen, are among the worst food crises globally.
And Latin America, often seen as a big agricultural exporter.
It's a really complex picture there. Yes, a major exporter, but huge internal challenges.
Like what?
Domestic shortages for vulnerable groups, the highest cost globally for a healthy diet in some areas, extreme vulnerability to weather events hitting agriculture.
So millions can't afford a healthy diet, even in an exporting region.
Exactly. And climate change is a big factor. Think the Central America dry corridor drought, erratic rain, potential migration, or the Andes shrinking glaciers threatening water supplies.
So it's this contradiction, exporting food while struggling with domestic access.
Precisely. It really highlights those internal inequalities.
Okay, what about Europe, the US, Canada? Are they relatively insulated?
Not entirely. Europe's dealing with its energy transition, new farm policies, the Ukraine war impact. We saw those farmer protests.
Yes, early this year.
And noticeable food price rises for consumers.
And in the US and Canada.
A significant food affordability squeeze. Further price hikes predicted for 2025.
Yeah.
And agriculture in both countries is getting hit harder by extreme weather. Billions in losses.
And food insecurity exists there too, right? Even in high-income nations.
Absolutely. Millions experiencing food insecurity in both the U.S. and Canada.
It really just hammers home how interconnected everything is. No region is immune.
That widening gap in affording a healthy diet is a stark indicator.
And climate change seems to be this threat multiplier everywhere.
It is. And the reports also mention governance failures hindering effective responses.
Right. Emphasizing that food security is tied to peace, stability, good governance.
Fundamentally linked. So, given this really concerning situation, what are the potential responses? How are technology and policy trying to tackle this?
Well, technology first. There's a lot of buzz around AI in agriculture, precision farming, using data to optimize everything.
Tailored inputs, monitoring crops, predicting yields.
Even using AI to cut the cost of cultivated meat. Sounds promising, but what are the hurdles?
Well, there's a contrast, isn't there?
Yeah.
Between the potential and the reality on the ground. AI, IoT, robotics, they offer promise, but there are big barriers to widespread adoption, especially for smallholders.
Infrastructure, cost, digital literacy.
Exactly. High initial costs, complexity. It could actually widen the existing tech gap, unfortunately.
And lab-grown meat, alternative proteins, lots of innovation happening, costs coming down. But will it scale? Will people accept it?
That's the crucial question. Cost parity with conventional meat, scaling up production, consumer acceptance. worries about naturalness, safety, taste, texture,
Plus, regulations are patchy.
very fragmented.
Mm-hmm.
So while it might find a niche, it's unlikely to be a widespread solution to global hunger anytime soon.
Okay. What about vertical farms? Indoor stat farms sounds futuristic.
They offer advantages, definitely. Year-round production, less land and water, shorter supply chains. The market is growing. Big constraints.
Huh.
High operational costs, especially energy. Economic viability is mostly for premium stuff like herbs and greens, not staple crops.
And some high-profile ventures have struggled financially.
They have, so likely to remain concentrated in wealthier urban markets for niche products for a while yet.
So tech offers potential, but no silver bullet. What about policy? Government interventions?
We're seeing various things, rationing or price caps in some places, trying to manage distribution or affordability during shortages or high inflation.
More common in lower-income countries facing high food inflation.
Yes, but their effectiveness is debated. Short-term relief versus market distortions discouraging local production.
So, tricky to get right.
Absolutely. Design, enforcement, targeting are crucial.
And subsidies. Helping farmers with inputs or helping consumers afford food.
Global spending on agricultural support is huge, over $800 billion a year. But it's often misaligned, isn't it? Tends to favor grains, sugar, meat over fruits and vegetables. Doesn't always promote healthy diets.
And the impact on nutrition can be mixed.
Some studies suggest direct food or cash transfers can be better for dietary diversity than just input subsidies. Effectiveness really depends on the design, avoiding distortions, reaching the vulnerable, long-term sustainability.
And then there's global aid, WFP, FAO, providing emergency relief, trying to build resilience.
Absolutely vital. But these programs are under unprecedented strain.
That projected 45% funding drop for 2025.
Deeply concerning. Threatens nutritious support for millions of kids. WFP already warning of cuts in the Sahel, Nigeria. Huge funding shortfalls.
It's a stark paradox. Needs soaring, resources shrinking.
Exactly. And while emergency aid saves lives, there's a growing recognition we need to shift more towards building sustainable local systems, community resilience, address the root causes.
So things like cash transfers, anticipatory action.
Those innovations are being explored more widely, yes, trying to move beyond just reacting to crises.
It really drives home that point. This isn't just about a food shortage, it's about massive inequality in access.
Exactly. The divide between wealthy and poor nations is stark.
Rising grocery bills in affluent countries versus acute malnutrition and famine risk elsewhere.
The affordability of a healthy diet differs dramatically. Food inflation hits low-income countries. Hardest food can be 60–70% of household spending.
And the nutritional consequences are devastating. Millions of children acutely malnourished, mostly in low and middle-income countries.
And the capacity to respond varies enormously. Wealthier nations have more tools, while poorer nations are constrained by debt. And sometimes we see aid budgets cut in richer countries while other spending increases.
And it's not just between nations, is it? It's also about power within the food system, corporate influence.
Precisely. A relatively small number of large agribusiness corporations have huge influence. Seeds, chemicals, machinery, distribution, pricing.
High market concentration.
Reduces bargaining power for farmers, especially smallholders. Can lead to higher prices, maybe favor ultra-processed foods.
And seed patents, intellectual property, shifting control away from farmers.
That's a major concern. Restrictions on saving seeds, forcing annual purchases. Critics argue it undermines food autonomy, traps farmers in debt.
And the focus on profit maximization can clash with sustainability.
Sometimes, yes. Corporate practices impact land use, water, biodiversity. It can limit space for more community-led agroecological approaches.
So this crisis is deeply tangled up with economic inequality, corporate power, the erosion of local food sovereignty.
Pre-existing vulnerabilities just get amplified by these global shocks. Corporate power shapes what's grown, how it's grown, who benefits, often prioritizing profit over nutrition or local resilience, especially in the global south.
That's a crucial point. So looking ahead, what are the potential futures, say 2025 to 2035?
Well, the sources outline a few scenarios. The best case. Let's call it green innovation and global cooperation.
Okay, what does that look like?
Rapid development and, crucially, equitable sharing of sustainable ag tech. AI farming, resilient crops, sustainable proteins becoming widely available.
Plus renewed international cooperation.
Yes. Aggressive climate action, fair trade rules focused on food security, increased and better targeted development aid for rural infrastructure, research in vulnerable areas.
So overcoming those tech hurdles we talked about, making lab-grown meat cost-effective, vertical farms viable.
And having strong policy support, fair trade, reliable aid. The outcome by 2035? A big drop in acute hunger, more resilient local systems, stable, affordable food for more people, real progress towards zero hunger.
Sounds good, but relies on a lot going right.
It does, it's optimistic.
Hmm,
Then there's the worst case, climate refugees, famines, and food wars.
that sounds bleak.
It is. Unchecked climate change causing catastrophic, simultaneous crop failures globally, significant loss of cropland,
Leading to conflict.
escalating tensions over water, land, food and aid used as weapons, collapse of international trade, aid, mass climate migration, widespread recurrent famines.
And some analyses support this possibility.
Sadly, yes. Looking at risks and conflicts arms severe climate impacts, current trends could point this way if unchecked.
Okay, so best case, worst case. What about the most likely scenario?
Seems to be a sort of middle ground, maybe call it regional adaptation and global tension.
Meaning
A fragmented world. Wealthier, stable regions adapt their food systems using tech, policy, economic strength, but poorer, vulnerable regions fall further behind.
chronic insecurity, climate hits, reliant on shrinking aid.
Exactly. Global cooperation becomes limited, transactional, rising tensions over resources, trade protectionism, climate migration.
This aligns with projections showing instability, declining aid, export bans continuing.
It does. Advanced food tech might remain niche, benefiting mostly the affluent. Ongoing pressure from climate, population, volatile prices. Urgent adaptation needed, but implemented unevenly.
So food prices stay volatile.
Likely. Climate change could keep adding to inflation. The outcome by 2035 is this two-speed world.
Pockets of innovation and resilience in wealthy nations.
But vast regions, sub-Saharan Africa, parts of Asia, Latin America, stuck with persistent hunger, malnutrition crises, climate emergencies, constant geopolitical friction over trade, aid, climate responsibilities, refugees, perpetual crisis management for the vulnerable without fixing the root causes.
That most likely scenario.
Oh.
It feels depressingly plausible based on current trajectories.
And it does seem to reflect the complexities we face right now.
Which makes this next decade, 2025, 2035, absolutely critical.
Crucial. Decisions now on climate adaptation investment, sharing tech equitably, strengthening cooperation will largely shape which path we take.
Inaction leads towards the pessimistic outcomes.
Likely. And we need to watch technology. Will it democratize food access or just worsen inequalities?
So, circling back to our central question, the world isn't running out of food in absolute terms?
No. The evidence strongly suggests not. Global production capacity is theoretically sufficient.
So this is really a crisis of justice.
Yes, ensuring fair, equitable access to nutritious food for everyone.
A crisis of climate.
Absolutely. Building sustainable, resilient food systems is essential. Mitigation and adaptation.
And a crisis of power.
Definitely. Addressing imbalances in control over land, water, seeds, markets. Challenging corporate concentration where it harms people and planet. Prioritizing well-being over just profit.
So the path forward isn't just short-term fixes, it's systemic change.
Fundamental change. Empowering local producers, especially smallholders. Reforming trade rules. Investing massively in agroecology, climate-resilient farming. Ensuring fair tech access. Fostering real global cooperation and solidarity.
As the UN Secretary General said, trade must drive food security for all.
It's about creating a more just, equitable global food system.
Okay. For us listening, this feels overwhelming. What can individuals actually do?
It is daunting, but individual actions add up on a personal level. Reducing food waste at home is huge.
Making informed diet choices, less resource-intensive foods, supporting local, seasonal.
Yes, supporting imperfect produce. Maybe growing some of your own food if you can. Every bit helps.
And on a bigger scale, community, society.
Stay informed. Raise awareness in your networks. Support organizations working on food security, sustainable ag.
And advocate for systemic change.
Absolutely. Policies promoting fair trade, strong climate action, support for smallholders, holding governments accountable for aid commitments, for preventing starvation being used as a weapon, for ensuring aid gets through.
It really feels like this crisis tests everything. Our ingenuity, our policies.
And our shared humanity, ultimately.
Yeah.
It demands a profound shift. How we value food, manage the planet, relate to each other across this divided world.
The future isn't set in stone, though.
No. The choices we make today, collectively, will decide if we rise to this challenge.
That's a really powerful and important thought to end on. Thank you for guiding us through this incredibly important and sobering deep dive.
Thank you.
We hope this has given you, our listener, a much clearer understanding of the complexities here.
And we really encourage you to take some time, reflect on how interconnected all these issues are. Climate, conflict, economics, inequality, their impact on food security for everyone.
Remember, even though the scale feels overwhelming, individual and collective actions can contribute to change.
So we leave you with this question. What's one action, personal or societal, that resonates most with you? What feels like a starting point for you in addressing this global challenge?
And please do explore the sources we've mentioned, especially that 2025 Global Report on Food Crises. There's so much more detail there.
Thank you for joining us for this vital deep dive.